Who all can tell you not to sing your story? Who all can tell you that you're singing off key? You are the dancer, you are not the dancer. You are the song, not the one who sang. Be a beautiful songbird. No, you tell the truth. You tell the truth. You tell the truth.
Welcome, everyone. This is Thrive with Morella, the show for people who want to thrive body, mind, heart, and spirit. Does the mere thought of getting on an airplane or riding in an elevator set your heart racing and maybe get you hyperventilating? If so, you likely know what it's like to experience anxiety. Maybe it's bad enough that you've known the awful experience of a full-blown panic attack more than once, maybe. And if so, this episode is for you, or maybe you know someone. So if you do, you might want to tell them to tune in right now. Because I am joined today by Tom Bunn, who is a pilot and also a licensed therapist and a regular contributor to Psychology Today. He is the author of the book Panic Free, the 10-day program to end panic, anxiety, and claustrophobia, which is the result of his many years addressing flight panic in his role as airline pilot. He is also a former U.S. Air Force captain who flew the Air Force's very first supersonic jet fighter, the F-100. Tom, welcome to Thrive with Morella.
Thank you, Morella.
I am delighted to have you and to have this conversation because I know a lot of people would love to know how to regulate their anxiety, and especially if they're having full-blown panic attacks. This is something that is vital to a lot of people. So, Tom, I need to start with the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what is one of your personal keys to thriving in life?
It's actually turned out to be having stumbled on something that actually helps people do what they're trying to do, to get on an airplane without freaking out. Going to a subway in an elevator, it's really, I tried to invent this. That didn't work. I just had to stumble on it. But having done it, even though if I can't take exact credit for figuring it out, it's really great to be.
Oh, all of a sudden we lost your audio. I'm not sure why. We can hear you just fine, and then all of a sudden we lost it. No, yeah, I can't hear you. So you were talking about stumbling upon this, and I'm really curious as to how you stumbled on it. Let's see if we got you back. I can hear you. Yep, we've got your audio back. Can you hear me, Tom?
Okay, are we back on audio now?
Yes, perfect. So you said you stumbled upon this. So what is...
I'm going to have to find a way to switch my audio to...
so you can't hear me now.
Get back to...
So I'll just tell our listeners and our TV audience and YouTube audience that you, having been an airline pilot, you were noticing and you were aware of people having fear of flying. And you mentioned in the book that you became involved with the airlines program to help people with their fear of flying, but that it wasn't working. Is that right?
Yeah. We had people on the airplane in our so-called graduation flight. And we had told them that breathing exercises would help them deal with this.
Yeah.
And there they were sitting on the airplane doing their breathing exercises exactly as we told them to do in a full-blown panic attack. It wasn't very pretty.
And so, yeah. I was really curious about you then stumbling upon this, what you're saying is the thing that's helping them. So I didn't realize, how did you stumble upon this? So that wasn't working. The airlines program wasn't working. So how do you stumble upon this?
Well, the first thing was it became clear that I had tried cognitive approaches. And the problem is when people get really revved up, they don't have any cognition available to do cognitive tools. People escalate into panic so rapidly, as one person said, if you ask my name in a panic attack, I couldn't tell you.
Right.
So it became clear that if we were going to fix this, it had to be automatic.
Mm-hmm.
Jerry Lynn Ross, who used to be president of the Phobia Society of America, came up with something called thought stopping, wear a rubber band on your wrist. Every time you think a negative thought, snap the rubber band.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, okay, that seems to make sense, but self-inflicted pain didn't really sit well with me. So I thought about, what about trying something a little bit more sophisticated, thought redirection. Mm-hmm. Let's have a person, as soon as they think about the flying, immediately think of something else. Maybe it needs to be a big deal. So I remember working with a woman who was a marathon runner. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, okay, as you stand there, I'm going to give you a hand signal. When I give you the hand signal, go step, 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 take yourself back to the marathon. Mm-hmm. So, okay, say, okay, plane's taking off, give the hand signal. You're in turbulence, give the hand signal, things like that. And it worked for her. But in general, it was 50-50. Half mm-hmm. the time it worked and half the time it didn't. Then I had a woman who said, I'm going to link it to nursing my baby. And I thought to myself, you got to be kidding. You're going to get on the plane and think you're never going to see your child again. Fortunately, I didn't say it. She called back a week later, said she was on a flight, absolutely perfect. Mm. This happened 2 more times, and then finally I got it. Something is different about linking to nursing a child.
Yeah.
And it was about this time, one of the big researchers in oxytocin, Sue Carter, found that when a mother nurses, she produces oxytocin, shuts down the fear system pretty much so that she can't get anxious that she should stop nursing and do something else. So nature protects the child's nourishment needs.
Right.
So now what do we do for people who haven't had that experience? Okay. Well, when you pick up a newborn child, you also get oxytocin mm-hmm. for bonding. And males get oxytocin at orgasm. And as you know, we fall asleep and you get annoyed at us. But what's happening is before we conk off, we have this feeling, oh my God, I got to be with her forever. So, and with females, it's more sexual foreplay in a romantic situation. And then there's a couple of other things. If you interact with your dog mm-hmm. or an affectionate cat, you produce oxytocin. Also a 20 or 30 second hug. So we've got lots of things now that we know that will produce oxytocin, and just as it does for the mother nursing, shut the fear system down. Now we go Pavlovian. Pavlov rang the bell, fed the dogs a few times.
Right.
Then when he just rang the bell, they salivated. We're going to let the airplane be the bell, and we want to produce oxytocin. So we think about what are the things that are going to happen on the plane. You're going to walk on the plane. We link that to an oxytocin producing situation. Mm-hmm. The door closes, link that. The plane takes off, link that, and so on throughout the whole flight.
Yeah, it's interesting because in the book you present 2 main avenues or pathways that you're working with to help people kind of retrain themselves to have a different response as they're having the experience of, as you're saying, thinking of going to the plane, then walking to the plane, getting to the airport, then walking to, the gate and then the gangway and then through the door, like all of these different steps. And so one of them is the oxytocin path. And then the other one is what you call, the vagal braking path.
Vagal, yeah.
So you started off with the oxytocin path, which is essentially oxytocin is this feel-good neurotransmitter, right? That as you're talking about it, we experience it naturally in all of these, especially bonding experiences, bonding with a baby, bonding with another in lovemaking, bonding and cuddling or hugging or bonding with our pet, as you mentioned in the book. So it's this kind of bonding, relaxing, feel good, kind of feeling amazing neurotransmitter. So you use the experience of that to help people reprogram themselves when they're actually about to go in the situation that experiences where they experience panic.
Yeah, you want to set it up by practicing it for several days in a row so that it's built in unconscious procedural memory and will kick in even under stress.
Right.
You know, people who do jobs like firefighters and emergency room people, how do they perform under such great stress? By practice ahead of time.
Right.
So we want this practice to be set up so it works automatically.
Yeah. So what I see is your training as an Air Force pilot kind of coming into this where it's like, no, it's the training that allows you to do exactly what you need to do when you're under high stress. So now you're taking that, okay, we need to create a procedure for the situation of panic, and we're going to practice it until we know it by memory, until there's the procedural memory where, you know, the process is so well memorized that it just happens automatically when the high stress gets triggered, correct?
Yeah, right. So we have the oxytocin side.
Yeah.
That's to keep from getting the stress hormones. Now, the vagus nerve side, that's the other thing that's really a fascinating thing that was discovered by Stephen Porges, that under certain situations, social situations, another person's face and voice and touch activate the vagus nerve, which then goes to the heart, slows the heart rate down, slows the breathing rate down, and goes to the gut, relaxes it. So we got one way we could talk about is block the accelerator pedal, and the other is to hit the brake pedal. You know, we have the sympathetic nervous system revs us up, the parasympathetic calms us down, but what happens is that system's got to learn how to operate, and we aren't born knowing how to do it.
Right, to not get triggered. So then tell us about, I want to take a couple steps back because instead of, let me redirect. I'm not going to go back. Let's stay with this conversation about the oxytocin, not get the stress hormones running, and then the vagal brake, stopping the vagus nerve from, you know, kind of accelerating, right? So hitting the brake button, as you called, the brake pedal, as you called. So your methodology essentially has people first write out all of the steps, right? So people, go ahead.
If it's an airplane situation, we pretty much know what they are. But in some situations, a person may need to build their custom list. But we do in the book have lists for MRIs and elevators and bridges and tunnels and high places, things like that.
So can you give us an example of what a list would look like?
Well, the first chapter we talk about Carol, who's a librarian in Pennsylvania, and she went through the Fear of Flying program, and we have a chat every Wednesday night. She was on, and she said, look, Tom, I've got to go into New York to pick up some people at Kennedy Airport, and since 9/11, I haven't been going through the Holland Tunnel. I've been going all the way up to the George Washington Bridge. So could I handle the tunnel? I said, sure. Okay, so you're talking about making a list. So Carol, let's make a list. You go out and you get in your car. You moved out of the driveway. You go to the first place you make a turn, and so on. New Jersey Turnpike, et cetera, until you see the entrance to the tunnel. Quarter of the way through, halfway through, all the way out to Kennedy Airport. So we took all of those things and she linked them to calming influences. She could link it all. I think she mainly linked it to people, but she could also link it to an oxytocin producing situation. So she came back a week later and said she had made the trip, and she said when she first saw the Lincoln Tunnel, she did have a shot, but it went away. And then she went out to the airport, got her people, came back, got into the middle of the tunnel. She said her worst nightmare happened. She got stuck in the middle of the tunnel for half an hour and she was fine.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. And so you have your list, or you suggest the list if people are going to work. And I noticed a very detailed list of, say, the experience of riding in an elevator. So you walk in the building, you walk to the elevator, press the button, wait for the elevator arrives, opens the doors, walk in, all of these different steps. Is there a minimum number of steps that people should have? Because sometimes, you know, when it's an anxiety-provoking situation, they might not even be able to break the steps down, right? That they're like, I freeze. I can't even think of the steps.
I can't even get it written down. Well, yeah,
people, let's just avoid the whole problem and
Right.
don't deal with it. Then it hits you when you're in the situation. I think you pretty much have to find a moment when you can sit down and chill out and write that list. Now, one of the things we do, if the list gets to be thinking about something that's really stress provoking, we say, okay, instead of imagining you're being in the scene, imagine a photograph of the scene. If that's a trouble, let's try a black and white photograph. If that's a trouble, try a cartoon character. We don't worry about cartoon characters when they get these situations.
Right.
So we can use the cartoon as a vehicle to introduce the troublesome scene to link it up.
Right. So they can imagine all of the steps. So you've been using the term linking, and I know what you mean from reading your book. So what you're talking about is each one of these steps that might, when they find themselves doing that step, that's a moment when the anxiety might kick in, arriving at the airport or checking in, like all of these moments where the anxiety might escalate. You are in the training, that this new pathway that you're helping people create, you're having them link each moment to something. So can you tell us what the options of what you're telling them to link it to?
Well, you want to link to an oxytocin producing moment to prevent the release of stress hormones. You want to link it to a calming moment, a moment that activates your, what we call the parasympathetic nervous system. And a moment that produces oxytocin to prevent the release of stress hormones, nursing a child, holding a newborn, sexual afterglow for men, foreplay more for women, and your pets, and a long hug. Okay, you could take one or more of those things, and in the days leading up to the activity, link those things, associate those things. Just imagine that you have a picture, let's say if you sit down with your dog, and you have a picture of, like Carol did, of a tunnel entrance, and just hold it by the dog's face. That's a good way to link, but of course you can do it in imagination.
Right.
Then, every other day, try linking also to the vagus nerve stimulation that causes the heart rate to slow and the breathing rate to slow and the gut to relax. And that's going to be a person's face, voice, and touch. And it's got to be the right person. It needs to be a person who's not competitive. It needs to be a person who is not judgmental.
Right.
We need to be someone who, and this is easy to overlook, the person you need, because we think they're pretty ordinary. We're more attracted, perhaps, I think, to people who are demanding and have high standards. We're looking for somebody who, as far as you're concerned, they don't judge you at all. They're just easygoing. That person's face tells you, you don't have to worry when you're with me. I'm not going to attack you. I'm not even thinking about criticizing you.
Right.
That's the person's face, voice, and body language or touch you want to link to.
Right. So typically, in the book, I remember picking up that it could be a friend, a trusted friend, with whom people relax, or it could be, in some cases, somebody's therapist might be that person where people feel completely accepted. And so here's the piece that a little while ago I wanted to go back to. Because you present at the beginning of your book, well, for the first about third of your book, you talk about how really it's the early childhood phase of life where people might get primed for having panic or serious anxiety later in life, and it's precisely because they didn't have at that time a relationship with a caregiver, or a caregiver who is effective at helping them kind of de-escalate from moments of arousal, of some fear or anxiety, or or even upsetness, right? So can you talk about that dynamic, how that happens for a child and then for the adult, of what are kind of the steps that are necessary in that kind of the impact that calming presence of the caregiver or the trusted friend can have on our upsetness?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is some research just done this year at the University of Arizona, where they took 102 people, I'm assuming they were students here at the school, and they were going to try putting them under a stressful situation and try 3 different interventions. The stressful situation was putting your foot into 2 inches of 38-degree water. It doesn't sound terrible, but a couple of people dropped out. Vermonters wouldn't have any trouble with that, right?
No.
So anyway.
We do that for fun.
So the first group of a third of them approximately, they said, while your foot is in the water, of course they had them hooked up to measurement devices, think about your day. Think about what you did today to distract yourself from the water. Okay, so they checked those people out. Then the second group, they said, think about the person. Oh, by the way, I didn't say all of these people were in romantic relationships, committed relationships. So the second group, they said, think about the person you're in a relationship with. They measured them. Now, the third group, they had their emotional, they had their significant other there, physically present. And you, of course, you know, they did pretty well. But the thing that was amazing, the ones who thought about the person did just as well. So now if we go to this situation where we want to activate the calming system, you can see just remembering a person can do it.
Right.
So what we want to do is, you could do it with a person, of course, but you can also remember being with a person and remember that person's presence, their face, their voice, their touch. And what you need to do is to associate that with the challenge. Now, let's just take the elevator for a moment. Let's say you got a picture, a little black and white snapshot of stepping into an elevator, and you imagine that this person you're with is holding that picture right by their face, so their signals of safety in their face are getting infused into the elevator situation. And then the two of you look at the picture together. You hold a corner, they hold a corner, and have a little conversation about it. It doesn't matter what you say. What matters, the quality of the voice.
Right.
And then as you're having this conversation, you notice your friend just slip their arm around your waist and they're giving you an affectionate hug. Face, voice, and touch.
Yeah.
Now that, you see, we can link to a situation. But to go back to your question about childhood, early childhood, the calming, see, when a child's born, their revving up system works fine. They can scream bloody murder right from the get-go. But calming, no, forget about it. I don't know how to do that. You got to do that for me, Mom. Right. So that's what happens for a year and a half or so. Mom calms the baby with, guess what? Her face, her voice, and her touch. And just think about it. In the first few months, she talks to the baby. The baby doesn't understand those words. It's the quality of her voice that does it.
Right.
So let's assume that after about a year and a half, the child's brain has developed a lot, and now the child knows that if this happens, I can expect that to happen. So let's say the baby's in one room, mom's in a different room, and baby gets upset. Well, toddler at this point, a year and a half old. So that the toddler gets upset and thinks, as he or she starts to cry, Mom's going to hear me, and she's going to come in. And in a minute, I'm going to see her face. And she's going to say, hey, honey, what's the matter? She's going to come over and give me a hug. Oh, I'm okay now. Because the imagination of the mother doing that calmed the baby. So now the baby has, for the first time, activated its own parasympathetic nervous system. Now, if Mom comes in and says, honey, yeah, are you okay? Looks like you're okay, but let me give you a hug anyway. I'd love to give you a hug. So there's her mom's face, voice, and touch, reinforcing what the child expected. That helps it become a program. But if Mom comes in and says, hey, I rush in here, you were crying your head off, you're totally fine, why are you bothering me? I got stuff to do, get out of here, stop it. Well, that sounds perfectly reasonable, but it doesn't reinforce what the child's expecting. So the child's using imagination to calm itself doesn't get reinforced.
Right. So it doesn't become a program. And so what ends up happening is some of us end up with a greater challenge of self-regulating, of self-soothing, bringing that, that kind of arousal, that upsetness, that anxiety, of toning that down and saying, I'm actually okay. This is going to be okay. I'm not. So what you're then taking is that experience of having the caregiver or the trusted friend or the love partner helping someone kind of calm down, soothe, and say, this is going to be okay, you're going to be fine, the hug, the warm words, the look on the face.
And build it inside. And link it to all of the steps in the sequence of the anxious provoking event. Right, because you could say, having your calming person with you on a flight or with you for an MRI or going into an elevator, that helps. But if you, prior to the experience, do the linking, now the person can fight off the anxiety at a level below the threshold that you can be aware of it. And if they can fight it off before you can be aware of it, you never realized there was anything that needed to be done.
Right. It's just what I, as an NLP, neuro-linguistic programming person, I call this creating imaginary memories. Things that never happened, but we create a new imaginary memory of, say, for example, the flight in the elevator or the airplane. All of these events, we now imagine them, we link them with the warm friend, the caregiver who's with us, you know, holding our hands, giving us a hug each step of the way, saying, "You're good. See, nothing's happening. You're okay. See how calm you are," that sort of thing.
Yeah. Now, what I think people can take and use right away is, first of all, look for that person who gives you the signals that calm you down. Their face, their voice, their touch, not competitive, not judgmental. Somebody you don't have to be walking on eggshells around. And then for the next few days, instead of trying to keep anxiety out of mind, look for it. Look for an opportunity. If it's like most days, we're going to have several of them. So as soon as you can notice that you just got zapped a little bit or a lot with stress hormones, before you do anything, imagine that person just walked in the room, says hello to you, and comes over and gives you a hug. Now, it won't take very many repetitions of that for it to become a program.
Right. And so you say in the book and the 10-day sequence that you present that really all it takes is essentially 10 days of rehearsing this. So within 2 weeks of a scheduled flight, a scheduled trip, people can essentially take themselves through the whole training process.
Yeah. You can go through the training of linking to oxytocin that keeps the fear system from activating. You can link them to the face, voice, and touch of a person who's calming in case you get revved up and need to be calmed. And you can do that third thing we just talked about, how just in general, because sometimes panic happens out of the blue. You don't have anything to link it to. So if we can set it up so that arousal itself causes calming, just as we were talking about how the child, when aroused, starts to think of mom, and that becomes a program. Adults now can build that program in. All you need is one person who is accepting.
Just
and
one.
It's just like a jar of peanut butter. You can spread it on a lot of crackers. You can spread it on any number of challenging situations.
So all of a sudden, a question's popping through my mind where we talked about the bond with pets as being oxytocin producing, but could it be that you could do also the kind of vagal breaking with a pet instead of a human, you know, having that face, touch, and voice? Well, it wouldn't, maybe a bark or a wolf. Have you ever tried doing that with a pet?
Well, you see, the thing is that we know that some of these experiences do both. One of the things that does both is wedding vows or getting engaged, because here's a situation where there's some sexuality involved and there's also complete acceptance involved. The sexuality that brings the oxytocin that shuts down the fear system, and the complete acceptance that overrides the effect of stress hormones. So there are some dual purpose ones. And so oftentimes the client will tell me they're using something that I say, well, it could be producing oxytocin, could be vagus nerve stimulating, could be both. So let's use it. It's a good one. But also, let's add a specialized one. Look for a specialized oxytocin and a specialized vagus nerve ones on top of what you already got.
On top of them. So we're going to say goodbye to our TV audience. And before we let them go, I want to remind them of your book. My guest is Tom Bunn. His book is Panic Free, the 10-day program to end panic, anxiety, and claustrophobia. And it's available now. It's quite practical. Of course, Tom presents all of the explanation, the psychological explanation behind all of this, and it's very detailed in all of the exercises. I actually want to ask you about your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. For our TV audience, since you're going to miss it, you can join us on YouTube Live on the Morala DeVoe channel, or also tune in on the radio on 99.3 FM and 99.3 WBTV.org. So Tom,